Okay, the way we had planned the presentation today is that I will give a short introduction into the terminology, OER, OEPs, Open Courseware, Creative Commons, just to get us on the same level, and then talk a little bit about our pilots. Then I'll ask Janine and Bronwyn to introduce their pilots and to talk about their experiences, and then I'll conclude with some general remarks and learnings so far, what we can see, what worked, what didn't work in the pilots. And then hopefully there will still a little bit of time for discussions and questions and how one would pursue now to apply for funding, for example, and things like that. So as I said, there is a drive at CPUT to engage in a little bit more openness. Yes? I do record it as well, so I can share my recording with you if you want to. So the CPUT has embarked on a drive to openness. As you might know, there's in the library, there's an open access policy, there's an open data policy. They have developed a repository for open educational resources. So there's in general support on, policy level to move a little bit more towards an open education approach. And open educational resources come from the idea that, especially in contexts where resources are scarce, materials could potentially be open and shared rather than reinventing the wheel and paying publishers for the development of content. One could think about putting the money into the development. So it's not about free education. Yeah? These are not free materials. Somebody still has to pay for that. Whether you develop them as part of your professional, tasks at the university, you're still getting a salary. The university is still paying you for developing these contents, or whether you're part of these OER pilots, you will get some funding to develop. So it's not free. I think a lot of people, think open is free, but it's not. It is not free. There's still some cost involved in developing the materials, but the idea is that you rather develop them yourself within an institution and then share that with other people so you can combine efforts and resources rather than, buying textbooks from publishers which become more and more expensive. And there are lots of studies internationally that show the textbooks are becoming highly expensive and often nearly impossible to fund by students. And the access to textbooks is a huge factor in student success. So this is the idea behind open educational resources, that you're trying to develop something that you're sharing with others so that you can all share the load of developing materials, but also the idea that materials should live. So it should be something that can easily be adaptable, modifiable, updatable, so that materials become something that's alive, that's up to date, that we don't think about textbooks as something that's cast in stone and can't be changed, and we're thinking about creating content that is as, agile and flexible and responding to knowledge that's constantly changing, as you know. So all of these kind of feed into this big movement internationally towards open education. And open educational resources are the materials that are being developed as part of this open movement or approach to open education. So it is about digitizing materials. So it's online materials that are somehow accessible through the digital world so that you can share them, you can access them from wherever you are. You share them in big databases. People have access to it and can repurpose them for their own needs. That is what open educational resources are all about. So it can be anything. It can be a video, it can be a textbook, it can be an audio file, it can be images. It's anything that you use for teaching and learning. And that's really important. They're pushing this idea of reusing content. So rather than starting afresh over and over again, rather go have a look what's already out there and see how you can adapt it. I'll show you some examples of where this idea of reusing really, really worked for us. And open courseware would then be all of those OERs together, and if they basically complete a course. So it's all the materials that make up a course. If you allow people access to a whole course or to download a whole course and adapt it to your needs, that would be open courseware. So it's not free. This comes from Catherine Cronin, who has written a lot about open educational processes. And openness can, I mean, the definition is wide, and there's not one definition. If you look into the literature, there will be many, many definitions. But the important is that you distinguish between free and open admission. So open admission would be something like the Open University in the UK. So you have an open admission, you don't have limits, you don't have a certain number of students that fit into a classroom. It's all via distance, so it's open. They can accommodate, UNISA can accommodate hundreds of thousands of students because it's an open access institution. It's not free because somebody still pays for the development of these materials. So open doesn't necessarily mean free. Then you've got open educational resources, which talk to the materials that you develop. But then you also have open educational practices. And this is really where we found a lot happening. And what came out from the open educational pilots is that when you start engaging in the development of open educational resources, there are many other things that come that you have to think about that move you towards an open educational practice. Because when you start thinking about sharing these open educational resources, the idea of openness is that you share it somewhere where they're accessible to other people outside the institution. So if they reside on the learning management system, they're not open, so there are lots of things you start to have to think about beyond the development of the materials that move you towards then an open educational practice. Because it can also be the other way around. If you think more about open educational practices, you might find that you actually need to create learning materials that are licensed under a Creative Commons license because you want to share materials and that can't be copyrighted. So it's a two-way conversation, but you can't create open educational resources without thinking about the bigger context. How are you going to use those materials in your teaching? And that's when you move towards open educational practices. So what all of this underlies is that people created this new licensing model that's called a Creative Commons licensing model. And I mean, the people in the library will know about it. For a lot of people, copyright is still quite a murky and, gray area. So a Creative Commons license, open educational resources are not unlicensed. It doesn't mean there's no copyright attached. But the specific license that's attached to open educational resources allows other people to use and reuse and share and even sometimes sell your content. That's up to you. So what that Creative Commons licensing does, it gives the person who created the material the right to share that material so that others can also share it. So contrary to a copyright license where you're not allowed to just copy or modify or reuse the materials, a Creative Commons license specifically and intentionally allows other people to use and share that open educational resource. Yeah, so OERs do not mean that there's no license attached. There's still a license attached, but it's a specific license that allows you to use, reuse, adapt, and share your content. Yeah, so that you need to be aware. So if you're part of the OER project, if you get money to create these OER resources, you must be willing to share whatever you use, at least on the CPUT Open Educational Resources Library repository. So people will have access and people will be able to use your products, your materials, whatever you develop, your videos, your handouts, your textbooks. And as you develop them, you are developing them with an intent to share them. So you can't use images that are copyrighted. Those are the kind of things we would have to look at. You can't use materials that are copyrighted. You'd have to be super careful what you use, and ideally just use stuff that you have done yourself, graphs that you have drawn up yourself, images that you have drawn up yourself. But there are ways of asking, if there's copyrighted material, to ask the owner of that copyright if they would allow you to use that picture or graph in your open educational resource. And if you get a letter from the publisher saying, yeah, they're fine, and some of you have done that, if you have proof, then you can use it. But you have to develop your material with that in mind, that eventually it will be shared under a Creative Commons license. That's the purpose of these projects. So if you are precious about your copyright, this is not the right space for you. So in this space, and it's more an identity thing or a culture thing than actually a technical conversation. Because as a lecturer, you must think, you must feel, and it's of value. You must believe in openness and sharing. Otherwise, you will struggle, because eventually you'll have to share, you'll have to give up your precious work, and it can be scrutinized by the audience, by a global audience even, because it's shared openly. Yeah. But it still doesn't mean that you lose your attribution. So the Creative Commons licenses, and you choose, go from very open to very restricted. So the most restricted one would say you can use it, but you have to attribute to me. So you have to tell the audience, the global world, that this is materials that I have created. You're not allowed, non-commercial, you're not allowed to sell it, no derivatives. So you're not allowed to change it or modify it or edit in any way. And you have to share alike. You have to share it. Or in this case, you can't even share it. On the least one, you can't even share it. You can use it in your class as is, as long as you say this is done by me. But you can't modify, you can't add your name, you can't share it. You can't put your CPUT logo, you know? And then that is the most restricted. And then it goes more and more. It becomes more and more open. And the most open says, you don't even have to tell the world that it's from me. No attribution. Yeah. So and that is part of the rights of the owner of that document or material or video to choose what kind of license we are using. And because CPT doesn't have a real policy yet on what kind of license, they haven't drilled down. They've said in general they support open, but they haven't set down. There's no policy saying we suggest you use this level of openness. We usually say people stay as restricting as possible. But sometimes it doesn't make sense. I got a request from the library. There was a handout they want to share, and people have to modify that handout. They have to adapt it to their own teaching context. So you have to allow, you know, derivatives. So it would have to be one of those attribution, share alike, and I allow derivatives of my work because I want you to modify it. I want you to contextualize it. Yeah? So it also depends on the context and the purpose of that document. Does that make sense so far? So this is the, yeah?
Before you go, because now I'm thinking, if you talk of the open education resource,
yes,
something that we will need to consider in terms of the student profile.
Yes.
You know, the students never enter into the university young, and the level of maturity is not there. Normal when you go in face-to-face in classroom is better, because now if you use that online something, then it is going to give them a big challenge in terms of learning the material. Remember, they are coming from the school.
You need to, sorry to disrupt you, need to differentiate between the use of open educational resources, which basically just means I am creating my own textbooks, but I still see my students in class. But rather than buying a publisher, a textbook by a publisher, I create my own open educational resource. Yeah, I create my own textbook, as you say, because there are gaps in the current textbooks. My students don't get what I want them to get from the current textbook, so I create my own little textbook. Yeah, and I share that on an open educational resource. So somebody at UCT can use it, somebody at UWC can use it. They can add their UWC logo if they want to, their departmental logo if they want to. That's in my prerogative. Open educational practices would mean using these open educational resources in a way within teaching and learning that makes my teaching more open, whatever that means. If it means I don't just share on Blackboard, but I also have a YouTube channel, because I think that the videos that I create are not just useful for my students, but I think every student in South Africa could benefit from my introductory to statistics videos. So why should I just leave it on Blackboard? If I have already done that work, I decide I'm going to also share them on YouTube. That would be a move towards an open educational practice. Yeah, so you have to differentiate between that. So this is the repository on the library. It's called Digital Knowledge, and under Digital Knowledge there's a category called Open Educational Resources. And Sonwabo is the specialist on this because he has started uploading your open educational resources under this in this database, and there are links for all the faculties, for all the departments, and under each department there are different categories of materials. So you can look for audios, you can look for videos, you can look for textbooks, you can look for anything that you're currently. It's quite empty, to be honest. I think apart from your stuff and the stuff that Sonwabo has uploaded, there's nothing there yet. So it's not something that has been hugely promoted. This is really, we are doing pioneer work here. So we are going, as we go on, we will go on some sort of awareness drive. We will have a blog where we will, beyond the repository, we will talk about the different materials that were developed and advertise it a little bit. But so far, it's still very much non-used. So it will be, it's up to the pilots to populate it and make it more accessible. But these are examples of very successful open databases. One is UCT, who has been driving the open education movement in higher education in South Africa. They have a big open UCT database with all sorts of materials. And they're also giving, similar to us, grants. Have been giving grants to people to develop materials for many years now. So they are slowly building up this material. And I think the OER Africa is another big database for learning materials, mainly teacher training, education. So for people from education, OER Africa could be very interesting. Teacher training seems to be one of those primary success stories of learning of the open educational resource movement. I think because every teacher education training in every country needs similar materials and is struggling with funding. And so that seems to be one of the major, especially in Africa, major use cases. Here in CPUT, we have two, as far as I know. One of the first big OER projects were the first-year student study guides. So Nosisana, in the context of a first-year experience drive, used the first-year student guide from UCT. So it was developed by UCT, but shared under a Creative Commons license. So Nosisana from the first-year experience at CPUT could take the guide, brand it, see it has the CPUT logo, so you wouldn't even know it's UCT anymore, changed all the information that now pertained to CPUT, but it was a lot less work than having to create that guide from scratch. So that's a really nice example of how universities can work together, share resources. You know, if one university is more resourced than another, has more people developing these guides, CPUT can take it. And from CPUT, I think now it's being used at UWC and at Stellenbosch. So I think all four higher education are using the same study guide, but adapted to their own needs, their own student profile, their own branding, their own logos. Some changed even the pictures. But the core, the main information about study skills is the same for each and every institution. So that's a really nice example. And it was, you can see, it was share alike. So if you use it, you have to share it. There's non-derivatives is not part of it. So it means they can modify and change it, but it's non-commercial. So you can't now start selling this study guide, yeah? But you can use it as long as you add the attribution. So they have to say under here, you can see this is a revision by Fundani of the UCT Language Development Group booklet studying at universities. So they have attributed it. It's UCT's booklet that we have adapted. That's all you have to do. You have to recognize who the owner is, who is the original author. And so if UWC now takes CPUT's thing, they would say, this is a UWC adapted study book that was developed by UCT and later adapted by CPUT. Yeah? And now they adapted by UWC. Exactly. But this is how you share resources. For a context like ours, where we struggle with resources, those are really interesting examples of what you can do. Another really, for me, really success story was when the disruption started last year, UCT sat down and developed these two guides. Yeah? One on support and resources for lecturers for online teaching, learning, and assessment, and the other one was an online assessment guide. They shared this on a Monday. I remember they shared this on a Monday as a Creative Commons, under Creative Commons license. I saw this on Facebook and I thought, wow, this thing, I can adapt it in a day. Antoinette and I sat down, we adapted it in a day, and on Wednesday, we had shared the CPUT version. So we had exchanged all the information that pertained right straight to UCT and changed that to CPUT. We added our logo. We added a little bit else because they have got Sakai, we've got Blackboard, so there are slight differences, you know. But the core of the work was done. All we had to do is modify it. It took us 2 days. I know UCT sat on this for at least 2 weeks. It took us 2 days to adapt it for CPUT, and on Wednesday we shared it with the CPUT community. So this is, for me, open educational resources, you know, that really make sense, because we are a quarter of the staff at UCT. CIET has, I don't know, 40 people. We have, what, 5 in Cape Town. So we could never come up in that short time with our own guides. So we just took whatever they had, and because they were kind enough to share it under Creative Commons license, we could very easily adapt it and quickly share it, because often it's about speed, you know. I mean, we all were kind of, you know, the disruption happened and everybody was like, and now what? And a lot of lecturers ask us, so what do we do now? How can we do blended learning quickly? You know, and that's very, you know, that's very dangerous even, you know. So at least this was some information to lecturers who wanted to move towards a more blended learning approach quickly, to know where to get information, where to get support, you know, who to email, where to find stuff from Blackboard, and so on. And again, all we had to do is to say, you know, this is a document developed by CIET at CPUT, based on a number of open educational resources, such as one developed by colleagues from the Center for Innovation of Learning and Teaching at the University of Cape Town. Yeah, but we also added other information from other open educational resources. So we just combined, reused, modified. That's the idea of open educational resources. You look what's available and you see how you can adapt it to your own needs. You don't have to start from scratch. So open educational practices is now, after there was this big focus on OERs for many years, in the 90s, the early 2000s, you know, people got a lot of funding. The Commonwealth of Learning spent a lot of money to support the development of open educational resources. But eventually, people kind of hit a wall, because, yeah, you've got these open educational resources, but there are so many questions around now. How do you use them? Where do you share them? You know, if you share them on Blackboard, they're not open anymore. You know, those kind of, what does it mean to use OERs in teaching and learning? So that's when people move towards this idea of open educational practices, which is now much more. This open educational practices mean now, how do I use these OERs that I've created in my teaching and learning practice? And how do I keep it open? You know, what does it mean? What do I have to change in my teaching so I remain open? So it's not just that I create these open educational resources, but I actually use them in an open way. And this now takes a lot more, because it requires a significant, as Hegati here says, to change in practice in the development of specific attributes such as openness, connectedness, trust, and innovation. So now it's all about, am I confident enough to take this OER that I've developed and put it out there? You know, am I confident enough, like Bronwyn, to share these 20 videos that I've created on a YouTube channel? You know, and anybody who is looking on YouTube for Introduction to Statistics will find my materials. What does that mean to me? What does it mean as an online academic? You know, what does it mean to my online academic identity as an online scholar? You know, suddenly I'm not just Bronwyn in my class, I'm Bronwyn, the statistic guru on YouTube. You know, some people become academic YouTube stars, you know, because they're well known for their lectures, and people go Google them and listen to their lectures, you know. So there's a lot more involved when you start thinking about how you use these materials. And one person who writes a lot about this, as I said before, is Catherine Kunin, who did a seminar for the Emerge Africa Network last week on open educational practices, where she talks about her own research. And one of the things she says, so she has interviewed in her research, I think 19 academics at her institution, which is not an institution that supports openness. Yeah, so there are 19 academics who are more or less open in their practices within an institution that it's not necessarily open. So she looks at, why do people decide to become open? What are the barriers? What are the boundaries? What are the fears? And her main finding is that it's always personal and it's always contextual. You know, you can't just say from an institutional perspective, everybody should go open, because it's a lot more than just creating OERs. It's about your culture, it's about your identity, it's about how comfortable you are you sharing, how important it is for you to distinguish between your personal and academic activity, you know, how open you are in your social life. Do you run a blog anyway? And so you're already a lot more comfortable in sharing and exposing yourself, you know, than others who are a lot more private and a lot more careful in what they do out there. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you have to think about. So she added then to her definition of openness or interpretation, she says, you know, when you look at openness, you have different levels of openness, yeah? So on the highest level, yes, you have a policy, like CPT has a policy. The library has an open access database. But just because the library has an open access database doesn't mean that any of the academics now are going to go and share their data. Why? Because it's not just about policy. You know, you have to start with activities. What are open activities that lecturers engage with? What other practices? You know, how do these activities relate into a whole teaching or into a whole course? What are the values of the lecturers? How much do they believe in openness and sharing, and how much do they believe actually I can't, because that's my intellectual property. If I give away my data, you know, who am I, you know, if I give away everything? And there are researchers who do that. We have a colleague at UWC, his whole PhD was open. Every step of his PhD, every focus group discussion, every interview, every set of data he made available online immediately, asking for feedback, asking for other people to use his data and to see what they can get out of it. So it's much more a disposition towards openness than it is about policies and guidelines and, you know, the institutional culture. So, as I said before, using OERs will lead you to think about your teaching and learning practices and whether or not they're open. But using teaching and learning practices that are open already will get you into a space where you have to think about copyright and licensing and Creative Commons. So it's a two-way street. But one of the things that we found in our pilot, and that leads me now to talk about our experiences last year, is that really when we talk about openness, what is the most interesting bit, it's not about the content and the OER, but it's about everything that happens around that content, the connection people form, the community of practice people form around the development of open educational resources, the identities that kind of change when you engage in these kind of practices. So who do you become while you're doing all this? You know, how do you start thinking about your teaching and your students' learning, about sharing, about networking, about connection? So these are really the more interesting parts for us. So Hegarty has these elements of an open pedagogy, which are quite, you know, ambitious, I would say, because in her mind, so the way she would define an open pedagogy is if you're using, so it's not just about developing open educational resources, but you also share them in a space that is open to the world. It must be innovative and creative. By doing that, you are promoting ideas that you should share ideas and resources. There's reflective practice embedded. It's about people's openness and trust. You know, you're open to share. You trust the audience to use your content ethically and mindfully and thoughtfully. So there's some sort of trust involved there. It's about connecting the community. It's about involving your students in creating content, which I think for us was the most difficult part. And peer review becomes a really important issue because, as you say, the quality has to be there. So how do you develop processes and strategies to allow some sort of quality assurance in the development of open educational resources? So who provides that quality assurance? Is it by peers? Is it by students? Is it by an institutional body, you know, that takes these materials and looks? Most often what I've heard, like UCT, all they look for is that there's nothing that's copyrighted. So usually what Glenda Cox, who is the OER person at CIET, does is she checks that none of the material that is being used is copyrighted. But beyond that, she really trusts the lecturers to whatever they put there to make sure that's of quality and that it's original and that's, you know, authentic and that the knowledge is correct. You know, so she trusts the lecturer's sense of integrity and identity. I mean, whatever I put out there, I want it to be of quality, more than they have institutional quality assurance processes. But there are other institutions that have a lot more institutional systems and processes that they go through when they develop quality or open educational resources. But these are just some of the things that people would have to think about. So in terms of benefits of open educational practices, I think the idea of openness is that you allow connections and networking. So you move your content out there, you move your practices out there. You're not bound by the learning management system, but you're trying to reach an authentic audience, out there. So you facilitate students connection to the world through blogging, for example, So you plug into an authentic community of experts of practice. It's all about social learning, but learning together across beyond the classroom, beyond the institution. There's a lot around development of professional identities, of developing your own personal profile as an online academic or a digital scholar, as they call them. The co-creation of knowledge, so you mix and match, you adapt knowledge that others have already started. So it's this idea of collectively develop and further develop content and knowledge. And it's a lot around digital literacies. As you engage, you'll have to think about issues of privacy, of security, of bullying. All those things are things you'll have to think about and negotiate with your students. Setting boundaries about your private and your professional identity. Those are all questions that will come up automatically when you engage in these practices. So our own context is, it is an institutional research project. So the OER is registered as a research project. We got ethical clearance to research the experiences of the lecturers involved. It's funded by the TGG, and as I said before, the phase 1 consisted of a survey that we did with staff and students around the current and open practices. And then phase 2 was the selection of OER pilots, which is continuing this year and I think next year as well. So we have, it's an iterative, a cyclic process. And what's really interesting for us last year, what was, as I said before as well, is that this project, although it has never intended to be like that, became a blended learning project for a lot of the people involved, because by developing these OER materials, they started thinking about open educational practices and how they would integrate these resources in a more blended learning mode, which then really had some very interesting side effects in terms of having already prepared and having already created some alternative methods of teaching and learning with the students when then the disruptions hit. So that was not intended, but was a very interesting side effect of the OER project. So these were our 2016 OER pilots. Cheryl Belfort from engineering, Bronwyn is here, Suzanne Delroux is in accounting, Andre Steenkamp is in education, Zina is from Fundani, that's my colleague Eunice, Janine here, and myself. So all of us developed open educational resources, different ones and in different ways. But a lot of people decided to use screencasts of videos, which was also quite interesting. So I'd like to move to Bronwyn now. Did you add your slides?
I can't get onto the network, but it's just...
Do you want to come here and just talk about it?
But I'm going to use my PC just to guide, because I've
Sure.
actually got things planned. But not planned, but
But I'm recording here, so it would be great if you... Do you have any questions for me so far before we move to the pilots? Or you're fine so far?
Okay. So I suppose everyone's here for a reason, and I also wanted to know if anyone here, well, I suppose my quality colleagues aren't considering, they indicated that they're not going to make resources available at the moment, but were any of you two ladies maybe interested in doing screencasts, because that's what I did. Okay, so my involvement with the project was purely by chance. I actually didn't partake in the survey. I just started at CIET at the end of 2015. But I was on the TDP program, and Daniela was one of the facilitators there. And she saw one of my homework assignments, and I was very blessed, really very blessed that she thought it was interesting, and she invited me to be part of this open education resources project, because it has just made a fundamental difference to my life, well, to my work and my outlook on work and open education in general. And it's been a learning curve in the sense that learning about Creative Commons. So this is the advantages for me. It was learning about Creative Commons. It was really, really interesting. And it was really, really useful, because now what you do is you know a bit more, and you also tell other people about that. In our classroom setups, we actually often infringe copyright when we make our resources for our class, for our own lectures. You don't actually realize what you're doing and you're not doing. So that has been good for me, because it's educated me. Also meeting other people who are as enthusiastic as I am about improving my teaching practice or improving my practice. In our department, and we know, you get bogged down with bureaucracy, you get bogged down with marking, you get bogged down with the procedural stuff, we know this. And so it was nice to be involved in this project, because it was people that were motivating me and inspired me, and we just almost like fed off each other. So it was fantastic. That was another advantage for me. In terms of what actually happened, I'd like to share that it takes some planning to actually do this, to put these resources together. But if you think about it, and if you plan a little, if you think about it a little bit in advance, put in a little bit of effort, at the end of the day, it actually benefits you more, because you can use this and reuse this. Not other people benefit, but it's not just that you give of yourself and you don't get anything back. At the end of the day, you're actually going to benefit more from what this is that you've put in. And in my personal opinion, it's something different. It's really something new, and it's something different, and it catches people's attention. So you get positive feedback. I got positive feedback, and people requested more of what I was doing, more of the screencast, which was good. What I didn't do is and this is what I'm personally going to do when I start doing this again for my own classes, is I'm going to get learner-generated content, which this is something that I learned from my colleagues that were on the project. I should get more input from others as to what it is that I'm doing. And then also, Daniela did mention this, when fees must fall hit us, I was ready. Well, I was half ready. I had one foot out of the door, and I could hit the floor running. My coursework was 70% done. So I was actually, because of statistics, I don't rush through my work. I can't rush through my work. So fees must fall hit us in about end of September, October. There was about 5 or 6 lessons that I still needed to do. And this allowed me, being already involved with this project, allowed me to finish that, and successfully. My pass rate was fantastic. The other advantages, the last couple of things that I'm going to say, other advantages, other spin-offs for me, was I was able to attend the global conference because of my involvement in the project. So it had other positive things for me. I was also asked to, very fortunate, very blessed, so asked to co-present a talk with Daniela. And at the conference, and I got to meet really interesting people who gave me really interesting ideas from all over the world, from South Africa as well. And because of that, I've embarked on another project. Because of the connections that I've struck up, I found out that there's a free version of Blackboard that one can use. And now I'm actually doing an open course, tiny little course, only about 20 participants, with industry and including our students as well. So I'm spreading my wings and broadening my own horizons. So this has just been an amazing experience for me, and I think anyone that wants to get involved in this, I'd highly recommend it. And that's it. Flight my stories 8. Does anyone have questions?
Show maybe some of your screen casts.
We could you can get online, maybe, because
I am online. Is it on YouTube?
Yes, it is on YouTube.
Do you want to put the link?
Well, can I just Google? If you Google my name, if you just Google my name, you'll actually. Let's. This one is actually, yeah. It is. Yeah. Okay, this one is a bit funny. And you know, also, I guess I'm not that nervous to.
Hi there students, so welcome back. We are now going to do question number 6, which is the one-directional chai test. And as always, we start by reading the question. A local spice shop makes and sells their own brand of chutney. The amount of vinegar used in the chutney is critical to the taste, and the shop owner finds that his once popular product is no longer being so frequently requested by customers. So he sets off to investigate if the issue lies in the production line equipment. The standard deviation for the amount of vinegar has always been accepted as 1.2 milliliters. So there we realize there's some critical information that we're given. It has always been accepted, which tells us that is population data. So the standard deviation of the population, that would be sigma, is 1.2, which would mean that my variance is 1.44. Okay. From a sample of 30 bottles of vinegar, he finds it should be bottles of chutney, it shouldn't be vinegar. But from a sample of 30 bottles of chutney, he finds that the standard deviation is 2.1 milliliters. So the N is equal to 30. And then the sample standard deviation, that at least is clear to us. The sample standard deviation is 2.1 milliliters. 1 milliliters. Well, never mind the milliliters. And then the sample variance would therefore be 4.41. And at this point, let me also be honest with you. If anyone had to give me the answer to say, I can't do this question because it's a sample of vinegar and you're asking about chutney, I would have to give you guys full marks for this. But that being said, let's go on with the question given the data that we've just written down. It's a chai test. But
The last thing, and I specifically showed you this video because it's a reflection of my personality. And I found that this works. This works for me. Not everyone is, and I think that's what Daniela was meaning about open. It's just I've just made it work for me, and I think that is why what I've done has been so successful. And students are very forgiving. People are very forgiving. Okay, thank you, Daniela. Does anyone have any questions?
The time to develop all of these?
It takes about 1 hour to do a 15-minute clip. But you've got to prepare.
Yeah.
So you
can flow smoothly.
Yeah.
I think I just want to just say that really, I think often people think when they do OERs, they must be perfect, you know, and they must be like, you can't laugh and you can't make a mistake. We find that people or the students engage much better if they actually see those little mistakes. And I mean, I'll talk about this later, that there is a tension between making it as localized as possible. Even, I mean, sometimes people actually address their students. They say, hi, you know this, we did this in last class and what. It makes it difficult to make it general. You know, how will somebody else use it? But sometimes, yeah, it's up to the lecturer to find that balance. But even if if I'm not part of Bronwyn's class and she talks 1 or 2 minutes at the beginning to her students, if her content is useful to me, I will excuse that. Yeah, I might feel a bit awkward because it's not my class and she's not addressing me personally, but if it helps me in my own studies at a different university, and if people know that they just have to fast forward the minute at the beginning because she usually talks to her students, then they know, you know, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's really important because people are scared of going into this because they think it has to be, you know, without thought and like a real textbook, but it doesn't. It's something that works for you and for your students.
Because I know when I tried to do those videos from the actual PowerPoints, I had to shrink it because of the recording time, you know, so yes, planning is important because you also have to be more selective to only work optically, because they had the complete PowerPoints and you needed to just quickly plan out what was important.
Okay, thank you, Daniela. So I'm going to tell you about a completely different angle to things from our side. So the library has been offering a short course since 2013 called the Certificate of Information Literacy. What it happens is that we plug that into a first year subject. And the lecturer of that faculty or that course arranges it with a librarian, and that is how the teaching takes place. So it's arranged for a group at a time, not individual students. And then there can also be a co-teach element where the lecturer teach some of the modules, the librarian teach some of the modules. It doesn't really matter because in some courses, some of this is quite well integrated already and others it's not. So we developed it from 2013 available so that to help the faculties get it in. So what information literacy really is basic research skills, and it's how to find, use, evaluate, and information in a legal and ethical manner. So, of course, students will need information for all their assignments and whatever they are doing because we learn from other people, and there's a way of doing that, and that's what this course is addressed. So last year in June, the Senate made a decision that all first years from 2017 must do this course, and we have a standard assessment that we run on Blackboard to issue the certificate. But Monday, we had a further Senate decision, which is not even in this yet, but what it means basically is that it is now going to be a weighted component in every course. And every course is going to have to say in which subject is going to be. It's going to be weighted. So this certificate, in effect, is going to fall away from next year. So we were trying to find a way of how to deal with the administration, the academic administration. There were pros and cons to various scenarios, but this is so the teaching will still take place, the assessment will still take place, but it's part of the formal academic process going forward from next year. But what we then also felt, we wanted to add an online format of this course to make available where lecturers can make use of it, the librarians can make use of it in their teaching and so on, and this is where we are with this. It's not completely finished yet, but we are getting there. So one thing that came out for me was I attended that learning design workshop that you also arranged last year with one of the lecturers at Tech building. I can't remember Daniela her name now, but I remember what she said was this about learning design, and it was that 90% of the time you should use to think about and plan the concept of what you want to do, and 10% actually goes into the design. And I think sometimes we rush into designing something, but we haven't really thought it through and thought about what we want to achieve and so on, not just running into design. And that was actually quite a light bulb moment for me. So when we planned this, we had to consider a couple of things. What platform do we want to make this available to our students? And eventually we did decide on Blackboard. Blackboard is wonderful with its functionality in terms of getting information across, assessing and so on, but I didn't particularly like the look sometimes that you get. I didn't want a folder approach to it. And so I had to trial a couple of things, and I worked with Antoinette as well to see how we could make it look different. So we're building it in Blackboard, and what happens is it's in its own subject, and every lecturer from next year on would be able to pull that subject into any of their Blackboard subjects. So students will see the content here for their subject, and then underneath it will be information literacy, and they would be accessing both. Okay, like that. But the assessment will always happen in the actual subject. So students, we needed to think about the students. They have various devices. They have various software versions. They have limited data when they're off campus. They have different learning styles and different learning disabilities. Okay, so it was thinking about all of these issues and how we can approach this. So this is one example. So one of the things that a student must be able to do is how to develop a search strategy. They just got an assignment now. There's a topic. How do they unpack that topic? How do they get the main concepts, the keywords, a mind map, different synonyms and so on for keywords, and at the end have a search string that they can go put into a search box somewhere. Okay, there's a process that happens before that. You can do that. So for instance, so one of it is how to develop a search strategy. So our approach has been to make this content available in different formats. One is a little ebook, which I developed in Canva, which is a wonderful, have templates and everything available, and you download it as a PDF. And a PDF is a wonderful format because students can easily download it on the USB and they go home and they can go and look at it if they don't have access to our website or Blackboard or whatever from home or wherever they sit. So that was one consideration. And the ebook, according to this, if you look at this triangle at the bottom, the ebook provides the most and detailed information about this concept. So somebody that really wants to go and understand it fully as never can go and use the ebook. Then there's the infographic, same content, but it's at a glance. It's basic little steps quickly that you just go and look at. You don't want to go through the ebook. There's a clip, which is nice. That's sound, movement, and so on. And we are also wanting to make available all our ebooks in audio, and that is where Project 2 will come in, where we actually make them available in audios. And then we also have one of our staff members very interested in learning with students with disabilities, working with a disability unit. So if there's anything else that we're missing, that we have students with certain disabilities, we want to put it in the other component. So for instance, a clip might be too fast, a clip might be too busy and too colorful, and this font that you're using, not all students can follow that font or that fastness or whatever. So that's where we're going to see what else we can strip out of that clip or whatever to make it available for students with certain disabilities. So in terms of the OERs and the Creative Commons licensing, I think Daniela has gone through that already with you. I think for us was we have different licenses that we use, but we also have the question around whether it's the author that should decide on the license or whether it's the university that should decide on the license, because what we do actually belongs to the university. So I'm still a bit unclear on that, but we have different licenses because if we create something ourselves, we apply a certain license, but if we use someone else's work that already exists and adapted for us, they will have a license that I have to abide by. So that's why we have different licenses. And this course will be able to be used as a self-paced course, full course, that students can use on their own, or it can be used in a flipped classroom approach where the lecturer or the librarian can ask the students to go through this part of it, and then in the classroom we'll just do some exercises. The librarian would be able to use the clips in the classroom because we feel there's so much repetition and so many big groups that's being divided in smaller groups that they often have to repeat the same things over and over. So you rather just play a clip, play it, you can save your voice a little bit, and then afterwards you can discuss it. Or a just-in-time approach where a student right now needs to know how to do a search strategy, and you have a place to send them to and say, go and look there. So that's sort of how we go about it. I have it online here in Blackboard. So I don't know, let me just see what you can see. It's a little bit cut off there on the side. Is it max? Okay, this may be the... So it's not finished yet, but this is what it looks like. There's 5 modules. Daniela, I don't see the moving at the bottom. Oh, there it is. Okay. Let me see if I can move it around a bit. So what it basically is taking students through this, and as I said, it's not all in yet, but so for instance, developing your search strategy, and there's an ebook and an infographic for that now. Then we take them into some information sources. Now, the one that we have here is a book. How do students use a book? I think we tell them go get books, but we don't really teach them what to do with a book when they have it. And I think we assume sometimes that is sort of automatic, but it's not necessarily so. So if I click on this concept of an ebook, the PDF will open. This is the little ebook that I've made in Canva. So it's just busy downloading. Students would be able to download this on their own device
and obviously open it at home without having data cost for it. Okay, so it's going to open, I think, in 100% size, which looks very big. So I'm just going to do a little closing it a bit. So there it's just how to use the book, and then there's a table of contents, and it goes through the different sections. So here, for instance, we took a book and we had to get copyright permission to cut this book into pieces so that we can explain to students what it is. But we use this book now in the infographic and in the clips, so they all speak to each other basically, and we talk to them about a title page, an imprint page, what is the content pages about, then there's the chapters, an index at the back, what it is and how you would use it, what is the back cover, and so on. And we add our branding to it, and we also add a license to it. So that is then that is the actual ebook. Then we open a little infographic, which opens in a smaller template, and somebody who just wants to do a quick scan on it can do that. And you can also enlarge it according to you, how you want to. And of course the same clips and the same stuff is in there. And then the last one here is the actual clip. So if you open the clip, it opens like this in Blackboard. I can show you a few seconds of it.
Welcome to our How To series. You found the book that you need for your assignment. What now? Today, we will show you some quick ways of using the book. A book is divided in various sections. The cover, the title page, the imprint page, the content pages, chapters, index pages, and the back cover. The cover page indicates the title and subtitles, the author or authors, and the publisher.
Okay, so that is basically the idea that the same concept is discussed in various formats, and each of these become an OER on its own. So all the clips will be is already on the CPUT Library's YouTube channel that you can easily access. The ebooks and the infographics will eventually become available on our internal digital knowledge platform. No, I don't think the ebooks and the infographics yet. It's only the clips.
Yeah. The other thing is that when you upload an OER, it takes like 2 to 3 days because it goes through different people
to approve.
Approve.
Okay, so the some lessons and advice and so on that I maybe can share is that with the use of clips from other places, and often it has not local, obviously it doesn't have local accents, it has an American accent or so on. So what we did is we recorded again with a local accent, and then we place that, and we work through Derek and them's department. They have a recording studio on campus, and we have somebody that prepares it, and then a couple of recordings before it gets read, before it's right, and then we put it over the clip and we add our own branding onto it. So it's maybe something that was developed in another country, but we try and make it more local. Then also all the content, that the ebooks, the infographics, and so on. Daniela, you spoke about peer review. We have an internal library group that I asked a group to volunteer. Anybody wanted to volunteer and work and teach this. So we have about 6 or 7 of them are on a peer review. So all the work, the ebook and everything goes through that. I do a draft, they go through that, and we sit together and we add content, we delete content, and we update the content, so that there is a bit of a peer review process going through it as well. And we are going to pilot this now with an IT first year group in the 3rd term, where they about, I think, 300-400 in the class, so it's very difficult to get them in classes like this, and then get their feedback as well. So it's important for us to get the students' feedback and see how they've work with this kind of information, and then we'll take it further next year and make it available for everybody to use. I think maybe 2 things that I can just give advice on in terms of this. I think Bronwyn shared a lot on how everybody else's project had an impact on your own project, because you learn from everybody. I didn't think about certain things or didn't know about certain softwares or so on. So I think that is quite nice. But I think this takes much longer than you think. That's what I felt. I thought I would be able to do it much faster than what I did, and it was quite longer, because the other point is that I've made use of experts in areas where I am not an expert in. So you rely on other people. You rely on a recording studio, or recording artist, or a videographer, or something else. Different softwares that you need to get to know, for instance, or so we can't be a specialist in every one of the softwares that we use. So it's nice to actually get different people in your department to maybe know this one well, and this one is an expert in cartoons, this one is very good in screencasting, or whatever, so that it's difficult to know all of this yourself. So I would say it does take longer than you think when you start with your planning and doing it, and ask experts to help, and don't try and do everything on your own. I think it helps a lot to learn from others, and they are already maybe an expert in something which will save you time. Thank you, Daniela.
I think I just have one or two more slides in general about the learnings from our project across all 8 pilots. So what I've done, I've interviewed all of them last year, and particularly it was really interesting to interview them after the Fees Must Fall because of their experiences by being part of this project. So I think what we really need to see, it's a journey. Openness is scary for a lot of people. So this idea of putting yourself out in the open and sharing stuff with people that, you don't know, that putting yourself out there is scary, and it takes a while to get. I think it's quite an iterative, step-by-step process. And what really helped, I think, for all of them was this idea of being part of a group of people who are on the same journey. So this community of practice, we met once a month, I think, quite regularly, to update each other, to share experiences, to show what we developed, to give feedback. And I think that was really important. That came back from all of the members of this group, that really helped to see they're not alone. And a lot of things that you feel awkward about. I remember we had a long conversation about voice and whether or not to use your own voice or somebody else's voice, because we are all, it's awkward to hear your own voice, and you much rather employ somebody, to work with you and to give you his or her voice. But students' feedback is they want to hear the lecturer. They don't want to hear somebody they don't know. They're used to the lecturer. They're used to the lecturer's voice. They want to hear that voice. So it's different in Janine's case, because you kind of create generic resources for all students. But if the videos were not done by Bronwyn, the students would not react to those videos the way they emotionally engage with these videos, because it's their lecturer. So there are things that you discuss in these meetings that are really helpful in terms of, decreasing your fears or working on your confidence in sharing. So it's about learning together from each other, and also about quality assurance. We shared our work, and we gave feedback, and people helped each other.
When you talk of what the voice, when you project the voice, you also think the students who are coming outside South Africa, who are beginning to understand the English.
Exactly.
Those kind of things.
Yeah. So some people use subtitles if you think that's a problem, or they add the script to it. So there are ways of going about that. Because you're right. Yeah. So it's a confidence building mechanism, these meetings. It's some sort of sandpit. We are trying out things with each other. And it's a lot about experimentation and trial and error. We are not perfect. We don't have the right solution. And it depends on you and your context of what you have access to. So what technology you use, what approach you use, that's the thing really that you have to try out. So there's a lot of experimenting in there, and trial and error, and learning as you go, and becoming better and better at what you do. For a lot of them, it was about, as I said before, this idea of academic identity, who you are and how you project and, publish yourself, by sharing stuff online, and what it does to you, and what it does to your boundaries of private and professional life, and what it does to you, in your relationship with your students, but also with your colleagues and the academic network out there. So there are lots of questions around who you become when you become this open scholar or open educator. the balancing of boundaries is difficult. And as I think both of you said, it takes a lot of time at the beginning, especially to develop these materials. You become better and you become faster. But there is time involved, there's learning involved. Some had the idea of involving research assistants, and for example, Andre did that in education. He had 2 students who developed these tutorials for him. But you spend a lot of time managing these people. So sometimes for some people, like Bronwyn decided, actually, rather than employing somebody as I had planned, I'd rather do it myself because I'm quicker. You know, than trying to explain somebody what you want and train them and watch them and, you know, check the quality. But if you have a plan of, like Janine, of doing quite a number of highly sophisticated resources with a lot of different modes, and it makes sense to have a team of people to work with. And as I said also before, it became what was really interesting for us in that project, that engagement with open educational resources and thinking about how to share and engaging with the students on how best to engage with these contents actually prepared most of the people who were part of that pilot to respond when the disruption happened in maybe more effective ways than others. And also, I would even say ethical ways, because their students had already engaged with these kind of learning strategies. They knew where to access, they knew Blackboard, they were used to that kind of learning. So continuing to teach students, if they were already doing it, is very different than suddenly saying, I'm going to move everything online, and not having had the time to, you know, work with students, see what the problems are, you know, and finding ways around it. So that was one of the interesting side effects of it. So this is again from Catherine Cronin, a slide which I found really interesting, because what a lot of staff development focus on is this idea, will I share openly? So they talk about open educational resources, they talk about copyright, they talk about Creative Commons. So that's the typical seminars or workshop or stuff. Even us, we started with a workshop on Creative Commons. But what's really interesting is these other levels that often are not being addressed. So who will I share with? Where will I share? Who will I share as? Am I sharing in my personal capacity? Am I sharing as a professional? Will I share this or that? Or here, you know, which of my materials? So there are a lot of other levels that you have, or a lot of other questions that you're asking yourself. And what was interesting that through our community of practice and through the regular meetings, we were able to engage in these discussions as well, beyond the technical, how you do it and what copyright you use, which is usually the focus of training. So that's another slide of Catherine, and this leads me to the tensions, you know, and the complications when it comes to open educational practices, because in higher education, we work within very bounded spaces. So we have the bounded physical space of a classroom. We teach the students who are in my classroom, who are registered in my course, with whom I engage in and outside my class. And we've got very bounded online spaces. So our learning management system is bounded. It has limited access. I have to register. I have to be a student registered in that course. Otherwise, I don't have access to it. Now, open educational resource and open educational practices ask you to kind of challenge the boundaries, yeah, and to try and make those boundaries a little bit more flexible. Because as long as a material is only on the learning management system, it's not open. So it asks you to think about how can you make your learning more open. And this is now where lots of issues and tensions come in, you know, about institutional requirements for auditing and security. And there's a reason why these learning management systems are bound. So how do you negotiate openness within institutional regulations and control and policies? So those are questions you have to ask yourself. Other tension that emerged were this, you know, the tension between localizing your content, addressing your students personally, but then also how do you then share, you know, and how does it then make sense for people who are not in your course, and how do you negotiate that? We also had a lot of conversation around do we use open source software, which is really what the open education movement would support. So you use software that's available freely on the web, or do you use commercial software? Some of the lecturers decided to use Articulate, which is quite an expensive software package if you buy it beyond the 30-day trial period, which we used it for. The question of LMS versus open platforms, or LMS and open platforms, like Bronwyn did. So she would share her videos on Blackboard, via WhatsApp, via YouTube, wherever it's possible, and however the students can reach it best. The idea of openness versus safety. So the LMS is still quite a safe space, because I know I can control access to my materials. I know who will have access and who won't. If I put it on YouTube, I don't know who will have access and who will see and how it will be used. This idea of quality versus responding quickly to needs. So what Janine creates is a very sophisticated, long-term process and project, and the output will be of very high quality. A lecturer who has to quickly prepare a lecture because he can't come to class because the campus is closed, so stuff like Bronwyn will do will not be of the same quality, but doesn't have to be of the same quality. So again, it's a negotiation between context and students and usage that you have to do. The sustainability project versus support, that has to do with how sustainable is what you do. You might be able to employ a research assistant. Andre's tutorial is beautiful. It's a tutorial for East Coast conversation classes. And he had 2 students develop that. But now if he wants another tutorial, he doesn't have the skills. So how do you make that sustainable? He can apply for more funding, but it will always be linked to external support. So there's again this tension: do you have the time to engage yourself and to learn and to do it yourself, which is more long-term sustainable, but at the same time it takes a lot more effort from your side. So all of these things you have to balance. On-time management versus management of others. We've spoken about this. So this is my last slide, which I also got from Catherine Cronin, and I like this. It's risky to teach in the open. It's not something that's easy. You will make mistakes, but it's also really vital, because that's where our future is going. Our resources are not there anymore the way we, had access to resources. Maybe we will get less and less resources. We are in times of disruption and in times of scarcity. So we have to work together. We have to share. We have to become more open in some ways or the other. So I think it's really important to start thinking about these things. And I don't even want to go into the digital scholar identity, because I also think that is vital for an academic today. I mean, presenting at a conference is just not enough anymore. You have to have some sort of digital profile, a digital identity, and open educational practices move you towards that digital identity. Yeah, so that was our presentation.